everyone.
Hey.
We have a very different episode for you all today.
But also a different angle.
Yeah. Dean got a whole new setup on his desk and we're using his new laptop and new Rode mics.
Yeah, so hopefully these sound good.
Hopefully, we'll see. So today what we thought we would do for the podcast is we want to focus on quality over quantity. And in the past, we've done some serious quality episodes with some awesome guests packed full of awesome information. And we wanted to share some extra light on our favorites. Well, we're choosing just one today.
I was going to say, we've only chosen one, therefore. Is he the favorite?
He might be my favorite.
He's up there.
He's one of my favorite humans.
Yeah, you called him the Almighty in the original podcast recording, of which he was very happy with. He even said that he was going to put the Almighty before his PhD.
I love it.
So who is he?
Dr. Eric Helms. We wanted to...
Eric the Almighty Helms.
Eric
that sounds good.
Helms.
I like that.
Good. If you had a middle name, Dean, what would you make it? I know you have a middle name, but if you could have a different one. Dean the Serious McKillop.
Dean the Predictable.
Dean the Regimented.
Dean Predictable McKillop.
It's very suiting.
Or it would be like something that has to be an M to rhyme with my last name. So like maybe like monotone.
Dean Mad Dog McKillop.
No, I don't have a mullet.
Wow, you really
I don't want a mullet.
Painting an exciting picture of yourself.
Hi, my name's Dean. I have no personality.
Fun times.
Mad Dog.
Mad Dog.
That's bad.
I would clearly be Lizzie the Genius. Rhoda.
Genius.
Genius.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh, on that note, sorry, I know we have important things to do, like share with you really awesome podcasts, but I have somebody that I used to go to college with. She put up a photo of her kid and said, "My kid's so clever."
Oh, God.
Instead of clever. Fantastic.
But she's not.
Now, let's get to it, Dean. No,
cool.
She's clearly not.
So, yeah, we're actually going to be just introducing you nice and easily to the Eric Helms podcast, which happened many episodes ago, actually in a different office to this current one.
A different house.
A different view on the camera and a different microphone.
I think it was back in episode 20, episode 22, something like that. And Dr. Eric Helms is a natural bodybuilder, a researcher, a coach.
Publisher.
No,
not a publisher, an author.
An author.
Shouldn't call him a publisher. That's a lie.
He's a published researcher.
Yeah.
Did I say natural bodybuilder?
Mm-hmm. Natural powerlifter.
Natural powerlifter, all-around good human. And he had a lot of interesting things to say about the evolution of bodybuilding. People think that there's two ways you can do a comp prep, or even just two ways that you can go about losing fat and better body composition. And that is be a bro, go chicken and broccoli, fasted cardio, or full-blown IIFYMR and fill your macros with Pop-Tarts and psyllium husk and protein powder.
You may as well just drink sugar-free maple. I mean, why not?
Why not?
Who needs water when you can drink sugar-free maple? And
Dr. Eric Helms suggests that maybe there isn't such a binary approach to how we can go about getting so lean, and suggests a third path, which I think pretty much everyone can benefit from.
Yeah, and the cool thing I think at the time was he just finished his contest prep not long before we spoke to him, of which he used this sort of modified version of dieting to help him get pretty fucking peeled, if I'm honest.
Yeah, he did.
So, yeah.
But, if you're not a bodybuilder, it's okay. If you're a fitness enthusiast, there's a lot in here for you as well, because the same principles of getting strong and getting lean still apply, regardless of if you want to show that up off on stage or not.
Yeah.
So,
without
further ado.
Oh, you're supposed to send it back to me.
Sorry, without
further
ado.
Adieu? Not sure. I'm pretty sure it's ado.
I bring to you this episode. Bye, enjoy.
See ya.
Welcome back to another episode of the Flex Success Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Dean McKillop.
Cheers.
And the almighty industry giant, Eric Helms. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And I like that. Almighty giant, I feel should be probably right after my name instead of anything else from now on.
Put it on your business card.
Yeah, maybe like / #1 host of Iron Culture, something like that. Not to have any competitive nature, but
#1 host. Man, I'm going to have to link this for Omar and then perhaps just like put it on loop. I like that. Yeah.
Well, actually, before we get into the serious stuff, I was listening to one of you guys' podcasts the other day, and he was joking, of course, about his contest preparation length and how it's shortening. And he mentioned that he'd like to get on stage in jeans and a singlet. I don't know if he's aware, but this category actually exists in Japan.
It does. We saw it.
Oh my goodness.
There was a family division, and in the family division, you basically had to not train. You just showed up in a white wife beater, a pair of denim Lee jeans, and you hit poses for the fun of it. And I think they just gave out awards for everybody.
Yeah,
So
the music
you're competing and existing. I love it.
And with the family division, obviously there's children involved, and I'm not sure if a 5-year-old belongs on a bodybuilding stage, but it's really cute to see them be like,
Yeah. I mean, I guess if all they did was show up to hang out with dad wearing a singlet and jeans, it's not the worst, but I tend to agree that 5-year-olds probably shouldn't be on a bodybuilding stage. Yeah.
Very weird experience.
Go to a bodybuilding show in Japan, listeners, if you have not. Dean got asked for numerous photos because, I don't know, I guess he's larger than the average, but some of the actual pros were just being ignored.
Yeah, Hidetaro Yamagishi would get interest, but like Rich Gaspari kind of people just like, whatever. Like it was a really weird experience, actually.
It was.
But for those of the people that are listening that don't actually know who you are, Eric.
Who? Like people under a rock?
Yeah, those people. Can you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to the rock people. That's the thing I can definitely do. So yeah, I think to keep it simple, I'm really just somebody who absolutely fell in love with the iron game and got bit by the bug per se back in 2004. And then it became a career shift. I became a personal trainer. It became my primary way of expressing myself. Eventually, in a deeper sense, finding meaning. And it became my education as well. I went back to school and that took a long time and just really focused on that. So kind of fast forward to today, I'm a part of this crew right here, 3D Muscle Journey. That's myself, Alberto Nunez, Jeff Alberts, and Brad Limas started that in 2009, kind of as a way to support the lifting community, provide them evidence-based information, a more holistic approach, sustainable approach. And, we mostly work with the drug-free community. And not that you can't listen to me if you're not drug-free, but really just kind of our whole sustainable, holistic approach to the sport has kind of been my career arc, I guess you could say. And I'm kind of primarily the science guy. I'm also a research fellow here at the Auckland University of Technology, where I'm essentially working with master's and PhD students. Any postgraduate student is interested in that same kind of muscle nerdy stuff. And I still compete. I've done 13 bodybuilding shows now, and I think 17 powerlifting meets, a couple strongman events, and 3 Olympic weightlifting meets. And I plan to do more of this crazy crap in the future. Yeah, I guess the podcast, some books, research review, and PhD, a couple masters. I really just need like more in my life than lifting, but I refuse to do anything else. So that's basically me. So yeah.
You are a busy man, Eric.
I like to have a rich, full life and be very stressed. That's kind of how I like to do things.
Does part of that rich, full life include a social life? Do you have time for fun with all of that?
Yes, I do. I lift weights. No, I'm just kidding. I do.
That between sets.
So yeah, I probably the richest part of my social life is that I've been married for 14 years, coming up on 15 in 2021, and yeah, so my wife Barb is my best friend and my closest confidant, but I've made a ton of great friends through all the community. It's kind of the cool thing that blows my mind every day is that I get to maybe 5, 6, 7 times a year travel somewhere in the world and talk about bodybuilding and meet people from Singapore or Costa Rica or Perth, like we were talking about, and get to hang out with them. So I've made a lot of great friends through this crazy competitive dieting thing that we love to do, and yeah. So I stay in touch with them, and I do get a fair amount of free time. I'm pretty good at managing my time. I think there have been times in my life where I've absolutely not been, and there are definitely time points when I get really stressed and I have to recalibrate. But especially now that I'm done with my PhD, which I finished in 2017, I do have a little more brain and emotional and social space. So yeah.
For someone that is so busy, what would your tips be for people juggling multiple things, trying to stay on track with it all?
Yeah, I think so many. Let me think of what my prime ones are. I think for one, it's almost a misnomer to label it time management. Most of the time, there are times, and I have been there, where you're physically limited by the amount of time you have to do all the things you have on your plate. But most of the time, it's really the energy you have to do them. It's more about like guarding your energy and energy management. Like you probably sat there and screwed around or didn't do anything or watched Netflix or just laid there, with your hair on fire for a little bit in these periods where you're the most stressed you've ever been. And it's not that you were physically limited by time. It's that you weren't able to parse out where your energy should be. And one of the tricks I learned during my PhD was that when you've got a lot of different things to do, and they require like a different type of focus. So like during the PhD, you got to read a lot. You got to do boring ass data entry. You got to enter the BMI of all your participants or something like that. But you've also got to do really creative writing. But you've also got to clean up your EndNote, which is your reference managing software, so that you can see like, oh, that's a duplicate now that I'm doing my systematic review. You're going to have all these different tasks, and in the end, you've got to get it all done in 3 to 4 years. And that's just, it all comes from the same pot of time. But you may find that there are certain times where certain tasks just do not give when you push. So if you're trying to write creatively and the same sentences come out awkwardly 15 times, just stop, and then, work on your systematic review, work on some data entry, send out emails to follow up with people who you tried to recruit and now you're going to beg them in a different way, like all the stuff you may or may not have to do. I think they require different parts of your brain and different energy currencies, but they still require time. So I think learning to go with the path of least resistance while still having structure is a bit of a skill, but it was a big learning experience for me that was helpful. Second tip would be to actually cordon off time. So for example, when you wake up first thing in the morning, some people like to dive right into something difficult to get the ball rolling. Other people like to grab some low hanging fruit to build momentum. But either way, actually set that time aside. And I think especially if people are listening to this podcast, a lot of people in the physique community, their career ends up involving that. And social media becomes a way they put themselves out there. And social media is quite literally designed to take your attention and to get you to get sucked into your feed. And I think if you're using it as part of your business or putting yourself out there for promotion to hopefully open up some opportunities, you have to be extremely intentional, cordon off some time. Like I have almost my entire feed muted on Instagram. Sorry, friends. And I have like eliminated basically my Facebook feed at all. So I pretty much only get on there to post, respond to DMs or questions I get, and the tags I have, and then that's it. And I'm on there for 2 hours and I'm pretty much gone unless I get tagged. And then that's case by case. So I think those are probably the biggest lessons I would give as far as how to manage your time in kind of the space we're in.
That's awesome. I'm definitely in the latter group of liking to tick off easier tasks to get momentum. And sometimes, starting with making the bed, but sometimes I find myself like doing tasks that aren't on my list, and which is fine. So then I write them on my list and cross them off.
Nice.
Just so I can look at the list with things crossed off.
Yes,
I think that's cheating.
Is that crazy? Is that?
It's cheating. It's not crazy. It's just cheating. That's all right.
It's a post-production list check.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie, I've done that before.
Have you?
Yeah,
I do it all the time.
I do it too, to be honest. I literally did it yesterday. So I think sometimes when you just don't like the top 4 on my list are things that I have to sit down for and spend 8 hours on. So I'm like, that's not going to change today. But I did record that 15-minute video for Andrea, so yeah.
Yeah.
Find your little successes where you can.
Now, as someone who's been in the bodybuilding world for a long time, how have you seen shifts in the industry within that time?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think there's definitely shifts in practice. There's shifts in mentality. There's shifts in culture, and there's even shifts in the interconnectedness of it. So I've seen when I very first got into bodybuilding, it was, let's say 2005, I first started thinking about competitive bodybuilding and became aware of the Olympia. And I thought, hey, that'd be cool to do one day, not the Olympia necessarily, but just bodybuilding. Don't get me wrong, I had hope. And I didn't even know that there was a significantly sized drug-free, tested community. And then I went to my first show in Georgia. It was an INBF show, the Iron Eagle. I think Rodney Hilaire hosts that show. He's a multi-time heavyweight champion at INBF from back in the mid 2000s. And that was a huge eye opener. And at that time, it didn't get a whole lot of respect, recognition, or it was very seen as kind of like separate. And I'm happy to see these days that there's a lot more intermingling and cross-talk between the enhanced, the tested, and just kind of the bodybuilding community as a whole. There were points where it was very much like, you guys are the farm leagues, or you guys are just lying, or we don't take you guys seriously, or and also the other way too, like this very self-righteous, like you guys are cheaters or something like that, even though you're not tested, or you have it easy, which I don't subscribe to those beliefs, but I have seen those kind of divisions. And now I think sometimes there's a lot less malicious divisions. First of all, there's a little more unity, but when there are divisions, it's kind of like, I just don't know anything about that world. I'm not in that community. Someone might be very, very steeped in the national community, or someone might just be totally following the IFBB Pro League, and they're not really aware of anything else, which is what it is. But I think that's a positive. And I've seen other shifts too. Like I know one we're going to talk about is the shift from having kind of the traditional contest prep approach of having an X number of week diet, and it has like 3 or 4 different phases where you basically remove certain food groups, and it becomes progressively more, I'll say rigid, but also lower calorie, probably higher protein, probably lower fat, lower carb as you get closer and closer to comp, when you're eventually, just eating like white fish and veggies. And that's the process to get shredded, to then, the if it fit your macros approach, to now we're starting to have that pendulum swing back, and people are starting to realize that a really, really, I'm going to say rigid if it fit your macros approach is also problematic. So that's been one big change. And I've also seen a pretty significant change in training, where we've kind of, I don't know if it's a real change, because I've seen this happen multiple times. This isn't new, but the step away from kind of the body part splits to other things, although it always kind of seems to come back to body part splits, which is an interesting topic. So I've seen training change, I've seen nutrition change, and I've seen the face of the community change a lot. And I think it will continue to do so, like the physique division, bikini division. Apparently the family in Japan division, that's a new one too. So
yeah, you should have heard the music that went along with this family division. There was like these pew 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 pew, like these gun noises, and they came out like
massive lighting show. It was an impressive setup.
It was. So I personally see a lot of this evolution as mostly positive. But what I'm also seeing with the rise of social media is that a lot of sellouts are selling junk to people that don't have the tools to realize that it's junk. And I know that some regulation can sometimes be problematic. I'd like to see a little bit of it though, because I hate seeing people being preyed on with, waist trainers and detox teas, and or just even following really harmful approaches into comp prep and end up with binge eating disorders after, and just so many mental health problems that follow. And I do think, we'll talk about the default diet in a moment, but I do think that would go a long way in kind of relieving some of those symptoms.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think social media is it's a double-edged sword. It probably is like a multi-headed mace or some other type of medieval weapon that cuts in all directions. Because it also gives a science communicator like me the opportunity to speak to a large audience and tell them helpful things. It also allows someone to get correction or an alternative perception quickly from someone through a comment. It also allows you to block them and everyone else who you disagree with and create a bubble. But it also gives someone who has no interest in helping others but just wants to make a quick buck and sell gimmicks. So it's all of those things. And to me, it feels like the same bodybuilding industry I knew 15 years ago, but just like on fast forward, in all directions. So it's just kind of like this accelerator for all the things that already existed. And I agree with you. It can be dizzying and worrying at times.
Yeah.
Yeah. The opportunity for exposure for different camps to get an insight into each person's sort of approach is obviously far more diverse with social media. I think that's actually what's allowed the natural versus unnatural federations and groups of coaches and clients and coaches and all that to actually kind of intertwine.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I think one of the interesting things that have been in the past is probably that those in the untested federations have had at least the opportunity to rely on pharmacological enhancement to get them by for poor protocols. Whereas a natural competitor has to try and irk out as much as they possibly can through the knowledge that they learn to get the best possible physique change that they can. And because it was sometimes slightly different to the untested immediately assumed that that was different and wrong. Whereas now we're starting to see a bit of an amalgamation, I think, of thoughts. And weirdly, in a sport that is typically quite chauvinistic, narcissistic, my way is the best way, now we're starting to get like the community of science communicators like yourself to actually bring them together, which is, I think, probably the biggest change that I've seen in the last 5 years that I've had like heavy involvement in it.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing too, and I think some of it's really hard to just put your fingers in your ear and go nah these days, because like you see so many ways that people are doing it different than what you have assumed is the only possible way. I mean, you just wouldn't get corrected as much back in like the T Nation days. Someone would make a claim, point out an anecdote, and you'd be like, oh, I guess that's right. But now like you can see some IFBB pro or some natural pro bodybuilder or some scientist or some, like there's just so many examples of people doing it a different way. So I think it does something to prevent someone from really just like staking their claims, slamming a flag down in the full body approach and the keto diet and saying, no, these are the only two things, combining two random things. So I tend to agree. Yeah.
I really want to ask you this problematic question. So there's two different camps. There's the tested and untested, or natural and enhanced bodybuilders. And I actually think that's kind of gray and really difficult to define, because there's things that are tested for in natural or tested federations that still can be seen as not okay to take, like T3, for example, or metformin, for example. Where do you lie? Would you think that it would be, within an ethical framework for a natural bodybuilder to take metformin or T3 and still claim a natty status, even though it's within line with the rules?
Oh,
yeah. So I think the banned substance list in the end is kind of the arbiter here, right? And T3 in at least all the legitimate natural organizations I know, but this specific example is banned. Like taking exogenous thyroid hormone is a banned substance in like INBF, WNBF. I can't speak to every single federation because there are literally almost 100. But I would say that at least in the largest organizations that are semi-serious about testing, and have a well thought through banned substance list. Some of them just copy paste from WADA or from other organizations. I know of organizations that don't really test but say they do. But I mean,
yeah,
again, that's what happens when you have 100 organizations. You're going to have a different level of organization, mom and popness, seriousness, etc. So overall, though, philosophically, the way I come at it is that there are kind of two aspects. There's the law, or the letter of the rules, and then the spirit of the rules. And the letter of the rules is what I think every person who is competing is obligated to follow, right? If you don't want to, just compete somewhere those rules don't exist, and then the spirit of the rules is kind of the acknowledgement that pharmacology is changing. Like it's probably easiest to point out. It's because this window is getting smaller over time. But now it's opened up again. I think SARMs are probably the kind of the biggest window opening, because they're something that you can get over the counter. They're not marketed as really what they are. They're taken very willy-nilly in certain parts. They're not regulated. It reminds me of, say, like the 2004 to kind of like 2010 period, where everyone, well, even before that, if you go into the 90s, kind of before my era, where pro hormones and designer steroids were being sold on like bodybuilding.com. And anyone could just take them, and they didn't realize that they might have actually been taking, oral steroids or something that had nothing in it. That's the crazy thing, just how poorly they are made. And they were basically popping up and off a banned substance list as the organizations were going, oh, what is all this crap? And it wasn't until there were some controlled substance acts that came out that kind of narrowed that window. And I think as a natural competitor, you're probably going to best service yourself and your health and your own philosophy for why you're competing by trying to follow not only the letter of the law, but also the spirit of it. Like, I'm trying to do this as someone who is taking largely just nutritional supplements. And of course, that's a gray area in and of itself. But I think you're trying to go to a place where you have roughly a level playing field, either way, right? If you're going to the enhanced strengths, you know that the further you go up, if you want to keep going, you're going to be dealing with this other variable that people who are serious are going to be maximizing, you know? And I think if you're in the tested ranks, you pretty much know that outside of creatine and caffeine, that's kind of it, you know, like, and nothing under the sun is going to be invented that's a true nutritional supplement that is going to do much more than that anyway. So if you're spending all your time hunting down all these additional supplements that you could be taking, you're kind of just putting yourself at risk. And I'm not saying like, don't do it. Like, if you want to find some crazy, you know, appetite suppressant or new gen pre-workout, that's great. But like, I think the problem there is almost that people describe this they believe supplement marketing hype, you know? So anyway, I tend to think that people need to be very familiar with the banned substance list and follow it both in terms of the spirit and the actual written items on it. And, you know, if you are actually competing in an organization where you're allowed to take T3, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that. I think that's probably potentially more harmful than actually taking like a low dose of testosterone. But if it's allowed and you want to do that, then it's allowed by the organization, I guess that's fine. But I would say most organizations, the only time I have seen, I'll take a step back. With a therapeutic use exemption, you can take T3, T4, and that is typically in someone who actually has hypothyroid. And so that is a thing in natural organizations. But that should hopefully be actually because you have a metabolic issue. So.
Yeah, but if you don't, you're saying that it doesn't align with the spirit of the rules. And
you'd think.
Well, the spirit of the sport, and what you're trying to chase. Because otherwise you're trying to literally chase some form of enhancement in a bottle to make you better than what you can be, which is the whole spirit of being a natural body.
I don't know. I'm still so on the fence about it. I've got one foot on either side of the fence. Like, I guess it's like doing a sumo deadlift in powerlifting, because even though everyone else is doing conventional, a sumo gives you that advantage because of your mechanics or whatever. So I'm thinking, like, is taking metformin kind of like that? Like, you're allowed to, but should you?
Using the rules to your advantage.
Yeah, using the rules to your advantage.
Yeah, I mean, so the things that are actual pharmacological drugs that require a prescription that do give an enhancement that are not on a banned substance list, I think they probably just should be on the banned substance list. And in most cases they are, like, or they have, like for example, the INBF WNBF has any subscription drug used for bodybuilding purposes. So for example, I could go out and I could get, you know, the blue pill if I really wanted to get like a massive pump, you know, everywhere. And that would technically be, breaking the rules. Or like if someone wanted to get a subscription appetite suppressant, right? And if they use that during contest prep because it helped them make it easier, that would technically be against the rules, even though it wouldn't pop on any piss test. So I think that's a useful rule. And some of those kind of broader kind of like, hey, any hormone or any prescription drug that is used to enhance performance for bodybuilding is banned. I think those caveats are useful. Now, of course, that only gets picked. This is a different subject. Of course, if people want to cheat, they can cheat. Like you will always be able to cheat the tests, and I almost think that's like a non-issue. I think when someone comes to me and they're like, "Well, you can cheat the test," and I'm like, "Yeah, what's your point?" And they're like, "So everyone's cheating," and I'm like, "Now that's a pretty cynical view. Like, that's a step too far. I won't do with you that because it's possible to cheat, that 99% of people will. But that's like me assuming that every person on the planet is actually selling drugs on the side just to make money. Or I saw an old lady fall down. Did I help her? No, I just stole her wallet. Like I could, and I could get away with it. So of course you would. Like when someone takes that viewpoint, like everyone's cheating.
Yeah.
My first thought is, I don't trust you. If that's your worldview, So anyway,
we've said that exactly the same. Like self checkouts at shopping centers. People are like, oh, everybody steals from them. Like, Well, you obviously do.
Yeah, that's what I figured out from this conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your worldview applies to everybody.
That's funny.
Exactly.
Eric, do you want to talk us through like what a rigid diet is, and then, you know, the evolution to macro counting, kind of eating on the fly, and then into the default diet?
I would love to do that more than anything else in the world. So this is an interesting thing. So there has been a line of research kind of going on in the nutrition science world and the psychology of eating world, and then there's also been what's been going on in our community, and they're parallel, but they're not exactly always the same. So I'm going to start with kind of the story of our eating disorders, kind of the first there. So like I positioned earlier, kind of the traditional approach to bodybuilding is you take your 8 to 12 week diet, maybe 16 weeks if you want to get really lean in 2002 or the 80s. And you break it into 3 or 4 phases where eventually you're just eating like, you know, spinach and tilapia at the end. Or maybe barramundi if you're from Australia. And that, you know, you'd start with having some carbon fat sources, and then you'd cut out carbon fat sources until you're down to nothing, and you even have limitations on which vegetables and what protein sources you can eat. And this would effectively get people, not everyone, but a fair number of people shredded, especially if they decided to do a bunch of cardio, which was the other part of that, eventually doing 2-a-days. You know, 8 to 16 weeks also lines up nicely with the typical length of a cutting steroid cycle that people would take during this phase. And that was the traditional approach. Somewhere along the line, there was enough people who said, hey, we should probably pay attention to energy balance and calories. And you started to see similar plans that would pop up where you'd start at 2,500 calories and eventually get down to like 1,800 for a male bodybuilder over the same course of time. And there was more variation in these meal plans. But in the end, you pretty much had, you'd see a meal plan. It would have a time and then grams, not of protein, carbs, and fat, but grams of certain types of food or serving sizes, you know, tablespoon, cup, etc. And then occasionally you'd also see, and here are the calories and macros for it. And literally born on the bodybuilding.com forums sometime in the mid 2000s, people started basically saying, you know, I think we could make other meal combinations to hit these targets. And it started with including certain foods. And then we started to see just how the emperor really had no clothes. We had these lists of foods that we saw as bodybuilding good and lists of foods that we saw as bodybuilding bad. And there wasn't always a really rhyme and reason to it. I think one of the most glaring examples that I really like is that, okay, we get that brown rice has more fiber than white rice. Okay, good. So brown rice is better. That makes sense. At least it's internally logically consistent, sort of. I know you're shaking your head, and I agree. But just to make this example, another one, we have our brown bread or our wheat bread is better than white bread because it has more fiber. One's more broken down. But then somehow sweet potatoes became good, but regular white potatoes became bad. Like white potatoes are processed food. They're not. And this is just a different type of potato, right? And that was, and sometimes the level of awareness that the bodybuilding community had for which foods were considered good or bad. Like white potatoes, don't like the color. It's essentially food racism, which I'm against. Yeah. So, and you saw all kinds of things like this. Cheese is not okay. Why? I don't know. I mean, like, okay, how about low-fat cheese? That still makes your physique soft. But why? Don't ask me that. Dexter Jackson or something like that, you know? And eventually, like, so it got stripped away and these arguments happened and it started to create this literal, like, war. And an unfortunate, not literal, that's inaccurate, a figurative war.
They're not definitely killing each other.
They were actually using tanks labeled if it fits your macros. Yeah, no. So, so there became this online war between the if it fits your macros camp, which was basically truly came out of the question, can I eat this food? Well, yes, if it fits your macros. And it became an acronym. It got used so often. So then it was the if it fits your macros versus the clean food, dirty, you know, like, and the arguments were getting more and more camp based. And the problem anytime you have these two opposing sides is that anything related to your side is now dumb and I won't do it. So you straw man the other person. So it started to be like, why would you eat Pop-Tarts? And it's like, well, who said I'm eating Pop-Tarts? I'm just fitting my foods to macros. Okay. And then the other group was like, I eat whatever time I want, and meal timing doesn't matter. The food you eat doesn't matter. And you start to see people with these, basically these accounts on Facebook at the time and eventually Instagram. And it's basically seeing like, what can I get away with? I'll spend 35 minutes in the kitchen with all these fake foods. I have like defatted, peanut powder I mix with water. I've got Walden Farms, and I've got like protein pancake mix. And 45 minutes later, I've got this thing that tastes kind of like, like pancake breakfast, and it's 150 calories. And I'm like, yum. And it's, mostly like aluminum and sucralose, but and then like you're essentially focusing all your time on food. You're eating a different thing for each meal. You have no meal structure in terms of timing or what you're eating, and you're relying on your multivitamin at some points, and your diet's getting weirder and weirder as contest prep goes, as you develop these behaviors. And anyway, I've kind of given like the most ridiculous versions of both, but those people are out there, and it came from this camp-like struggle to where everything was jettisoned from one or the other. And I think now we're in this place where we're starting to see that the If It Fit Your Macros crowd got a little crazy. Like perhaps sources of food matter. Perhaps there are certain values to foods that are independent from just their macronutrient values, like not just micronutrients, but also things like phytonutrients or certain structural food components. And that there's more than that. More importantly, is that the actual satiety value of foods, how full foods make you, things like energy density and the time that it takes to consume them, and how they make you feel, and how well they sustain energy. All these things are pretty useful. And we're finding that if I spend all my time thinking about food, focusing on food, cooking, and trying to make shit taste great, it actually makes my diet harder. But if I can do this in a slightly more mechanical way and just live my life and have oatmeal in the morning, that's actually a lot easier. And we don't need to be making the diet harder, but we don't want to make ourselves become like super focused on the sensation and the taste of food, when in the end, the nihilism creeps in of contest prep. You're going to be starving. You're going to be food focused. You're going to hate life. And it doesn't matter if you're hating life while eating, 150 calories of fake pancakes after you cooked for 30 minutes, or if you had a sweet potato, or God forbid, a white potato and chicken, So I think that's kind of where we got to. And along the way, If It Fit Your Macros got called flexible dieting. And I think that in and of itself is probably problematic, because now we're going to shift to the parallel universe of research here, where we've had this line of research in the behavior of nutrition and nutrition science going. Back in 1999, a group led by Westenhofer looked at restraint. So restraint is pretty much what's required to be on a diet. The mindset of restraint, not inherently bad, but you have to actually hold yourself back in our modern environment, our obesogenic environment, if you will, to not overeat in most cases. You have to establish habits. You have to be more active. You have to look at food a little bit differently than the average Westerner, who typically is slowly sliding towards obesity, or at least a significant portion of our population is. So, but what Westenhofer found out is there's basically two different types of restraint that you can categorize people into. Those who are flexible restrainers and those who are rigid restrainers. And what he did was he created a dichotomized scale on the restraint scale of a certain eating inventory questionnaire, and found that certain people restrain themselves in a way that would be considered rigid. And that typically is associated, now that we've done more research, a black and white mentality. Seeing as I'm either on or off the diet, foods are either good or bad. And it had a lot of recidivism. And in general, if you were to categorize people as rigid or flexible, you would see higher BMIs in the rigid restraint, higher incidences of disordered eating, body image issues, lower like happiness scores, and just lower quality of life. And in general, less diet success and more times that they regained weight. So essentially, by going all in and focusing on it, they set themselves up for failure repeatedly. While flexible restrainers typically were lighter, had lost a similar amount of weight but kept it off, and didn't have to the same degree the same type of unhealthy relationship with their body and food. and which is really interesting. And this has been, research has been carried on for a long time. And now today, there's even more questions to be asked. And there is the whole idea of intuitive eating. And this is really important because it helps us understand what the problem with calling if it fits your macros flexible restraint. And now we've seen that rigid restraint and flexible restraint actually share a lot of statistical variance. And what that means is that they can look really, really similar. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. If you're like, I'm a flexible dieter, I track my macros, all good, and then a grain of rice falls off the scale, and you dive off the table, Die Hard 2 style, grab that rice, put it back on, and you're like, whew. Or like you lick your entire bowl clean. Or your wife's like, oh, great, you're flexible dieting this year, Eric? And I'm like, absolutely. She's like, can we go out to eat? And I'm like, sure, can I bring my food scale? And she's like, what?
Yeah.
All of these things are examples where someone might be tracking macros, but have an extremely rigid mentality. And one of the keystones of true flexible restraint is that you're able to auto-regulate and make adjustments. And I've talked to some people saying like, well, yeah, like, so you burned a lot more calories today. And they're like, I think I did. I don't know. I'm just really tired and hungry. Like, well, why don't you just, increase your carbs by 50? Like, because I'm eating 200. And you're like, okay, man, chill out. So I think the methodology is not what makes something flexible. Rather, it is your attitude and your disposition towards your relationship with food that makes you either have flexible or rigid restraint. And that is something that kind of got missed. And I'd say, man, for probably the past, let's be honest, 5 or 6 years, I've been kind of like clanging that bell, like, hey, pay attention here, that we're not doing flexible restraint. So that's kind of the overall story. And now with the intuitive eating side of it, we're starting to even look at ways of going, hey, if you want a healthy relationship with food, maybe you need to actually spend some time not tracking at all and just eating based upon, some of our natural hunger and satiety signals, which is a difficult thing to do in bodybuilding when our sport is quite literally dependent on us going counter to those signals, at least in contest prep. So it's a relatively complex culture and information set and arc of our community to follow and understand. But I think that sets the stage for where we are at to probably have me do a little bit less monologuing now.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the interesting thing is, like, before bodybuilding became mainstream, it's likely that sport, let's call it a sport for just the ease of conversation, pageantry, whatever you want to call it.
I'm good with that. We'll call it a sport for fun.
That had a particular personality archetype that sort of moved itself towards that style of dieting. They probably dealt with it quite well, so on and so on. And you move forward now into the 2000s where it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. More people are saying, I want to do that because I saw my friend do it. Yet there's this huge background of potential eating behaviors that have been instilled from years and years and years. We've got a lot more people now that are probably a lot more susceptible to problematic dieting issues. But the people that started it still are like, it's the same as that perception we were talking about before with the stealing. It's like, well, I'm fine on this style of diet. Everybody will be fine. And we're really starting to recognize now how important it is to have this sort of overarching understanding of like the importance of this internalized discussion that people have when they eat.
Yeah. So we personally, we've moved away from, we used to have the word flexible dieting on our website and whatever, and we've totally moved away from that for some of the reasons that you've discussed. But obviously we still, use macros and energy balance and blah, blah, blah to teach our clients about, what sort of foods will help fill them up with low energy density and keeping a calorie controlled diet and yada, yada, yada. But we really bumped into this big problem where people were grasping onto control through counting macros. And they thought that that's what they needed to do forever to maintain their results, which is why Flex coach Shannon, on behalf of Flex Success, wrote a book called Life After Dieting, A Guide to Informed Eating. Informed eating definitely isn't the same as a default diet, which we'll get to, but it's similar in the sense that we're using the tools, like the skill sets and the habits that we built when tracking our macros to move away from tracking and just making informed choices. Because we know what eating 2,000 calories, let's say, is what you need to maintain your results. We know what that feels like. We know what that looks like. We know that, if you're leading up to a period and you're really hungry, you can just eat a little more then, and then eat a little less later. Maybe swap your horrible, evil white potatoes for
the most satiating potato of all, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Just for more vegetables or something like that.
Yeah.
So we've really, I mean, not for as long as you, not 6 years, but we've more recently tried to ring the bell of like, hey, you don't have to hold on to this macro tracking forever. We're just using it as a tool, like an educational tool.
Well, the control of macros and being controlled by the counting of macros actually makes people lose control of their internalized understanding of how they feel. It's a really interesting thing that I've even seen, even in the contest prep group, where they are like super neurotic about numbers.
100%. Yeah. Well, first, let me just say my arm is getting tired of ringing that bell alone. So I'm really pleased to see that these days a lot more people are stepping up, like Shannon, like you guys. And there's just appreciate it. Yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot more voices now. There's been creep of the I'm not even mad about it, like the anti-diet culture coming in, because I think I don't agree with everything that comes out of the anti-diet kind of folks, but I think it's created some really good conversations. And I think when you're so engrossed in bodybuilding culture, sometimes you don't see some of the stuff that we do that is often really, really counterproductive, and I think one of those things is someone who sees themselves as a flexible dieter, but they've literally not stopped tracking macros for 5 or 6 years. And the only times they don't are when they actually completely lose control. Like you said, they're being controlled by macros. They lose any sense of their own awareness of what their body needs. And they get put in a situation where they can't track macros, or they're just too damn hungry and they go off the deep end. I've even seen some people who have to track their binges, which is crazy to me. It's like you wrote down the fact that you ate a whole tub of like almond butter. Like, I don't know if it matters at this point, man, but okay. So, I mean, and I've been there. Like, I track my macros from the start of my contest prep in 2007. And then, except when I binged, basically post-contest, through my next 2 seasons and all the way till before I moved to New Zealand in 2012. So that's like 5 years. And it wasn't until I actually kind of got out of that did I start to understand this stuff. And that's when I first started like, hey, like voice in the wilderness, hey, we need to be thinking about this differently. And like informed eating, I think if we want to get objective about it, like I think the main potential issue is that when someone uses macros as a crutch rather than a tool, right? If it supplants your idea or your ability, let's say, okay, we're in a sport, we're going to stick with that. If we are athletes, we know that good athletes are intensely aware of their body, right? We're aware of our body signals. We have a quote unquote intuition, which is really just being able to recognize patterns and evaluate our feelings and evaluate our needs and make decisions based on those things, right? A good athlete should be able to make changes in the pocket, if you will, if I want to use like a quarterback reference to gridiron. But you have to adapt to the changing environment of the sport that you're dealing with. And in bodybuilding, that includes your eating and training. So if tracking macros is your only thing that guides your diet in the off season and the in season, there is pretty clear data to show that can make you less aware of your hunger and satiety signals. And then you're completely reliant as a crutch on this external cue. And I think there are ways to have control and be able to manipulate and pull this lever when needed of changing your nutritional intake while still retaining some degree or as much as possible of that intuition, that internal body awareness. So for example, rating your hunger and satiety, making adjustments to your portion sizes based on a numeric value, even if you like numbers for hunger and satiety, or going through just a phasic approach to how much you track. Like one thing I like to do with my competitors in the off season is get them to the point where they're literally eating based on hunger and satiety. And if they're someone who, if left their own devices, would not gain weight, then okay, we need you to be slightly full all the time, right? And then but the backbone of that are the habits we establish, which I think is what we're going to talk about with the default diet. And that's kind of like informed eating. Like you have these sports supportive nutritional habits that are the backbone of what you do nutritionally. And then the kind of the pressure valve of how much you eat is dictated by the phase of sport you're in, and at different phases, hunger and satiety, but may also include tracking, because there's a time and a place where that might actually be the best tool. Like let's say you're 12 weeks out and you're dealing with a very small margin of error to actually get in a deficit and not feel like total trash or not be able to train. And you don't really want to go by these hunger signals, which are always the same, eat. And B, really not that helpful because it's going to suck no matter what. So maybe we should track macros at this point and just kind of leave it and just be robotic and get through the sucky phase. But then when we go to the recovery phase, once we're done with our diet, that's when we start to re-implement these hunger and satiety cues to get that intuition back and learn to live a normal life before we do it all over again and revisit our eating disorders.
Yeah. I have 2 super interesting anecdotes that are going to nail the 2 phases that you just talked about. The first one was when I really started tracking macros and I was quite neurotic about my numbers. I had a trip to Thailand. I got sick. I unbeknowingly got salmonella poisoning. But as a really good man that I am, I decided to self-diagnose my stomach issues when I returned to Australia for about 3 months. And upon going to the doctors, he said to me like, "Oh, you've probably just got IBS." I'm like, no, I don't think so. There's something else going on down there, you know. And he's like, "How's your appetite?" I'm like, "Doesn't matter. Always full. I eat to numbers. If I'm not hungry, I eat." Like, it just goes down, man. It's like, "What about your body temperature?" "I'm always hot." Like, there was nothing that I was actually looking for to tell me that I was sick. And it came back that I had typhoid fever for 3 months. He was mortified.
Wow.
Medication fixed me in 2 days, mind you. So idiot, go to the doctor. So that was like a complete lack of understanding of how I truly felt. I was just eating to numbers and I just did that. Flip that to now in this post-comp phase. So I competed in 2018 in October, and I hadn't tracked macros since. And like the education of food has become better. And I've now, again, like yourself, I stepped away from tracking macros and started to see all the issues that my clients would have when they were hyper-focused on tracking macros and trying to find food. And I've gotten to a position now where I want to gain weight, and I'm finding it extremely difficult because of the behaviors that I've set up to maintain my current healthy behaviors are like really difficult for me to overshoot my food now. I have to consciously be full if I actually want to put weight on because of the behaviors that have been built and established on that sort of default diet, behavior diet sort of stuff, behavioral sort of activity.
So you're getting back into counting? Is that what
No, I'm not going to get back onto counting either because I'm not that hyper focused on gaining that much weight. To be honest, I'm kind of happy. So like, it's a nice place to be. Maintenance is still a goal, and that's what mine is, you know. But it is weird that like spending such a long time not counting and just actually adhering to how I feel has now consciously kept me where I probably would have been much lighter when I was pre-bodybuilding and running around as a kid, eating whatever I wanted, adjusting my energy intake to my energy output, and just sort of, you know, doing that autonomously.
Yeah, man, my end to no longer tracking macros. So I don't know if you remember, Dean, but we were at the airport on the way to New Zealand. This was years ago. And I left my phone at home because I'm really good at leaving important things and not taking them with me. It's a habit of mine that I thoroughly enjoy. And so
it's your default habit. This is good. Yeah.
And I thought, fuck, I don't have my phone. Most people will be like, my mom can't contact me, but I was like, I can't count my macros without my phone. What am I going to do? And I'd been doing it for so long now that it was just like, you know, you wake up and you brush your teeth. Like, I just count that's just what I do. And Dean was like, just chill out. Like, you'll be fine. You know what to do. And like, I didn't feel like I would be fine. But anyways, I came back, I think like 1 kilo or 2 lighter. I didn't die. Nothing
you
bad
consciously
happened.
undereat when you first don't track. I find that's pretty common. You know, there's this fear of overconsumption. So you're like, oh, well, I'll just eat vegetables. And when have you ever just eaten just vegetables and meat? That's not a thing. Maybe just don't snack on chocolate. You know?
Yeah. And so just by maintaining the habits that I'd set up and using the things that I learned through macro tracking to pick my food types and also how hungry I was, what I felt like, I've more or less maintained my body weight within 1 kilo. And I've just been doing that ever since, and it's been years. And I fluctuate anywhere between 58 and 61, which is weight maintenance essentially, because we're never exactly the same.
Yeah, we had a really weird shift. Even like I remember like counting macros and, you know, poo-pooing the rigid diet and sort of having that sort of like, me versus you mentality and whatnot. And then like I stopped tracking and I like just out to dinner and someone's like, oh, how did you track that? I'm like, I don't like. But there was a stage where I was actually worried about telling clients I don't track because there was this, I'm telling you to do this, therefore I should do this. The distinction between like coach and education and actual client was muddied. Whereas now I'm very, very about like, guess what, dude, I don't track it. And you know why? Because I don't care.
Well, you don't have to.
Well, I don't have to because we're making good conscious decisions in other parts of the day. But there's definitely been a shift there, even in that education point of view.
Yeah. Like Dean and I, we go out for tacos every Tuesday because it's Taco Tuesday. And what else do you do? Yeah, delicious. And I eat my taco with a fork because I just eat the meat on the inside. And that's not because bread is bad, but I love hot chips. Like, I would give anything for hot chips. So if I ate hot chips, the inside of my taco and the bread, I would be over on my calories quite significantly. So I just choose the portion of meal that I like the least, and that happens to be the tortilla.
Or tortilla if you want to be a gringo.
Yes, we're learning Spanish right now. We know the double L is pronounced a yeah.
That's so rare to hear that pronounced properly in this part of the world. So well done. As someone from California, I appreciate that.
Her mum is Venezuelan, so like,
yeah,
I'm the gringo of this household.
Here's the gringo.
Got it.
But I've been going ham on Duolingo, so I'm starting to pick up some more stuff.
Crushing it. I love it.
Yeah. So my point is here that we found counting macros really helpful. I actually found counting macros to be the thing that got me out of binge eating and this really rigid framework and the terrible relationship that I had with food. But I'm not married to it. Once I got what I needed to out of it and I pulled out those benefits, I don't have to continue it anymore.
Yep. So you took the good and left the rest, which I think is, like what I'm always cautious to do, because the way the human brain works, if it's not A, then B. It's kind of our position that we always quickly go to is when I point out the potential issues with tracking, I always try to make sure, like within the same sentence or two, like I'm not against tracking, it can be one of the most useful tools. Like just exactly like Dean, if you were, I actually need to gain weight and I'm really struggling following this habit-based approach, a useful intervention might be to start tracking. And if you're like, oh man, I'm never getting over 2,900 calories, you'd be like, okay, what's the simplest next lowest hanging fruit? All right, 3,000 calories is my minimum per day. Cool. And so that means like at the end of the night, you have, I don't know, crackers or something, like whatever, like you eat a little something extra. The way I dealt with that, because I had the exact same issue in 2018, I was like, all right, I have the brain space. I'm going to do this bodybuilding thing in 2019. I want to have a proper off season. Actually, it's 2017 and 2018. I did some mini cuts in 2018. And the way that my quote unquote gaining phases was just that like every meal where we didn't have a plan, we go out to eat and I would get the tastiest thing that also had protein. So, and I would just clear my plate. Cause I know when I eat out, I'm much more likely just to eat what's put in front of me. Then when I eat at home, I'll make the right portion size for my hunger and I just don't gain weight. So basically I just ate at restaurants to gain weight for it was the last season. So I found some solution.
That's expensive up at 4,000 calories.
Yeah.
Although Jackson,
absolutely.
if he listen to it, he eats out 24/7, that dude, and he reckons he's punching 4,000 calories. I'm like, mate, do you have a sponsorship?
I want to know if that guy robbed a bank. I don't know.
Jackson.
I'm a student as well. Like, how are you eating every meal out?
Jackson must have a rich benefactor who purchases meals out. I have no idea.
I reckon he's got a sugar mama.
I'm just going to throw this out. It could be muscle worship, not confirmed nor denied. But
is this how rumors start?
You heard it here, folks. It's a fact. Jackson Pios, a PhD student out of Western Australia. He gets the money from muscle worship. I can confirm it.
Diet breaks and muscle worship.
I can confirm this this rumor I heard by saying, yes, I believe that rumor. So, yeah.
Well, everybody trusts you, so it's definitely true.
I actually have some friends who have gone through with some muscle worship. He got paid. He got paid $2,000 to pee on a guy.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And I don't know if I would say no to that. Not that anyone's asked me because I'm not jacked enough. But $2,000 to pee on someone?
He didn't say no. He said yes twice.
Yeah, he did it twice. Would you do it for $2,000 just to pee on someone?
There was a time in my life I probably would have, but now I would not. No, I'm too financially secure. But there were times when the accounts were low, negative, had expenses.
All right,
couldn't eat out. So.
$20,000.
20 grand. I think I'm just good at this point. Like I'm not money motivated enough. I think I have a perfectly good toilet.
All right.
However, I did get asked way back in the day when I think after my first season, someone asked me if they could buy my posing trunks that I wore on stage.
Yeah.
Unwashed.
And yes, unwashed. And I said, absolutely. I'm planning on getting another one. And they were like, yeah, man, I'll give you $30. And I was like, what that's how much they cost. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, give me a 3-digit number and you're paying for shipping. He's like, nah, man. I'm like, that's Now I'm just insulted, you know.
Yeah.
Aw.
I have
If my ball musk isn't worth at least $100, then I protest. So
yeah, you just don't want them bad enough.
I think you have
That's right.
expensive musk.
well, thank you. I
That guy
appreciate
doesn't know what he's missing out on.
Musk should never be expensive. It's a terrible.
that.
Not specifically that musk, but just musk in general. Like you said,
I feel like if you're going to take the time to contact me back in 05, that's you know, like that must have been like a MySpace message or something like that. 07, I don't remember what it was. It was over 10 years ago. Like,
yeah, that's a long time.
My favorite part about posing trunks is the little round circles of tan either side, because the guy's balls are pressing against his fake tanned legs. And
Not in my federation.
there's just these like circles of white either side of the thigh and then circles of tan on the trunks. It's wonderful to watch.
Yeah, that's when you know you're a gifted individual.
yeah. That's actually how you know if you're natural or not.
Exactly.
That's so true. That is so true.
It's traps and ductor mess.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
funny. But for the record, I think it's wonderful to watch because it's awkward and hilarious. Not because I like nuts.
No.
'Cause, yeah, I feel like that came out wrong. So just clearing.
No, we'll leave that on there. That'll be the little snippet that beeps in before everybody hears what this episode is about, is that Liz saying she doesn't like nuts.
Well, you know what? I support your decision to like or not like nuts. I think.
Thank you.
I think in 2020 you can decide what you like. No one should yuck your yum, or yum your yuck. You know.
Pro-choice.
Yeah. So with all of this being said, Eric, you I believe in the last prep you took the sort of default approach to the front end of your prep. Is that a fair?
Yeah. So this kind of started as so I hadn't been tracking since 2012. I moved to New Zealand. I did the whole strength athlete PhD thing and just set bodybuilding on the back burner until I had the brain space to do it. I was actually going to prep in 2018, but I had a neck injury that fortunately resolved itself. So I just pushed my prep back a year. And in 2017, I just focused on gaining some weight into early 2018. And then I got up to 100 kilos, which is for me pretty big. And I knew that was probably too heavy to start a prep, or I'd be prepping for most of the year. So I did a mini cut in April and then September of 2018. And I was like, I don't really want to track for that. So I'm just not going to, you know? So I realized that like the way I had gotten up to 100 kilos was basically eating out all the time. And when we didn't cook a meal at home, it was like, I'm going to eat a large pizza. And I was like, I feel like this will be really easy to do a mini cut at this point. Just eat half a large pizza. You know, how hard is that, right? And that's exactly what I did. I just replaced meals out with like a thing of Greek yogurt, you know? And I dropped like 5 kilos in a month. So it was really easy. Like this just flew off me. And I did that twice. And I actually got probably leaner than I wanted to in September. I got down to like 88, and I actually started contest prep in December at around 89 and a half. So I think I just had a lot of travel. I was probably being like replacing a large pizza with Greek yogurt. It's actually a large cut in calories. I was under eating probably too much, but I felt great. Performance was fine. I was sleeping great. And I looked up and I had like quad separation. I was like, this is taking it too far. So anyway, I just went back to like eating normally, and I gained about 1.5 kilos back. I think I actually even hit an 87 in that second mini cut. But I was really encouraged by how easy it was and how smoothly it flowed. And so when I started my prep in mid-December, after kind of, you know, just going into a maintenance phase and making sure I was eating as much as I could without putting on too much weight, but still doing it relatively intuitively in October, November, and early December, I started the prep and I was like, I just don't feel like I need to track. And I didn't. And I just kind of created what I eventually articulated as my default diet, which is essentially the habitual construct of what I do every day. Which has changed a little bit now, but at the time it was I'd get up every morning and I'd stuff a bunch of greens, a piece of fruit or two, and put some whey and some ice in a blender, and I'd have a shake. And then for lunch, I would have, you know, either Greek yogurt or tuna and fruit or vegetable, and then same thing kind of deal for dinner. And then before bed, I'd have another serving of protein. And the portion sizes I was naturally selecting and the way I was structuring my diet, this was putting me around like 1,800-ish calories, which I don't have an extremely high energy expenditure. I'm most of the time sitting on my butt, you know, either talking to people or writing things like this. And that was an appropriate intake for a guy around 90 kilos was relatively sedentary. And then I would just simply have 2 days per week where I would eat something on top of that, and that was my quote unquote refeed. So I had a couple days of the week where I was in the mid 2000s, and then the other days of the week were 1800, and I just steadily dropped. And I was very comfortable doing it that way until March. And at this point, I was probably in I'd say like men's physique stage condition, and I got there with just doing it this way. And it was at that point.
Jab? Is that a jab? Are we going to say that's a jab? That might be a jab.
I mean, no, so I was in good condition, right? Yeah. I looked great, So did I backpedal well enough on that, I think?
Yeah, you did good.
Sweet. But my point was that I got into pretty damn good condition before I felt the need to start tracking. And honestly, the only reason I started tracking was because I was starting to feel the pressure. I was competing in April, and it was early March, and I wanted to do really well. It's the first time I've been on stage in 8 years. And as much as I really just try to do this for me and for the right reasons, in the end, I do I'm a representative of 3D muscle journey. I'm Eric Helms. If I don't get on stage to striated glutes, does that mean science doesn't work? All this bullshit gets in my head. And I was like, you know what? I just feel a little, instead of having this internal dialogue, why don't I just track so I feel a little more confident? I know that works. I've been shredded before, So anyway, I also got Berto on board to keep me sane, and Alberto Nunez, my colleague, and so I started tracking. He started, basically becoming my auto regulation and giving me kind of the constraints to when I could change my nutrition. And he gave me a lot of rope. Hey, if you're feeling this way, feel free to eat a little more, a little less, etc. And there were times when I was really grateful for that, because I did lose some of that calibration. I was actually in Gold Coast there for the ISSN first annual Sports Nutrition Australia conference. And I had my 2 refeeds, but I'd also been walking around Gold Coast and probably clocking over 10K steps per day, hanging out with Jackson, when he wasn't doing muscle worship. And and so I sent my visual update to Alberto. And this is actually in February, so I brought Alberto on a little earlier than I remembered. And he was like, "So did you have your refeed this week?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." And he was like, "Doesn't look like it." And I was like, "Are you calling me flat?" And after I got past the indignity of him saying I look small, he just basically gave me a third refeed. So I found that if anything, my intuition was leaning me to probably cut a little too hard. So that was good. So things like that was basically the flavor of it. And then in March, I really started, every day I'm tracking this stuff on FitGenie. And I'd have specific numbers from Berto. And that was kind of carried through all the way to the end of prep. But it was startlingly easy to get to that first show in April, where roughly 2/3 of it was untracked, and then the last third was tracked. And I got on stage in April. I wasn't in peak condition, but I had some glute dents, but I would say I didn't hit peak condition until June. But it was leaner than I was in my first season. It was about as lean as I was in 2011, not as lean as I was in 2009. But in April, I was kind of looking around. And I wanted to be like, did I just have an easy bodybuilding prep? Did I do this wrong?
You didn't suffer to win.
Exactly.
How close did you get from a body weight point of view from say default to track to then being on stage?
Yeah. So the lightest I ever touched down on gnarly depleted sometime in, I think, July was 79.5. And the lightest I saw for the April show was 81.5-ish. So it's basically a 2 kilo difference, which when I look at the pictures, I think must have been almost completely body fat. It made me realize just how much people put additional difficulty on their bodybuilding prep diet. It did get hard for me. I do truly believe that for almost everybody to get ridiculously peeled, no matter what, it is going to suck. And even once, this is something we could talk about if you want, but I basically reverse dieted all the way from June till August without gaining weight, the true most conservative form of the reverse diet. And I still felt pretty crappy, even though I had gotten myself up to eating in the high 2,000 calories and maintaining 80 kilos. But it didn't alleviate the symptoms of just being shredded,
Yeah.
However, when I was just a couple kilos over shredded, I felt fine. You know, like I feel like if I had just done that April show and then come out of it, that I could have walked around like 85, 86 kilos just with my habits, which is crazy because that would be like I'm ready for a photo shoot anytime, which I just did not think was possible for me. I don't think it'd be good for me as a bodybuilder or as an athlete. Like that's probably still too lean. I wouldn't be gaining by any means strength or muscle. But the fact that I could do that was kind of mind blowing to me. And it made me realize that back in the day, the times where I struggled way earlier than that was probably more due to my methods and my mentality rather than due to anything physiological. So,
yeah, I think as the focus shifts, it certainly makes it a lot easier when it comes to managing hunger and satiety and all the rest of it. And my experience with myself and also with clients has been that there's absolutely a body fat tipping point where it just shifts and changes the game. And I'm kind of at that point with a lot of clients in that sort of, 6 to 8 week out range. You're kind of like, now's your moment. A lot of people can get here. Not many people can surpass it because it's going to be a daily struggle. Energy's going to suck. Like I remember going for a walk with Liz, maybe like 4 weeks out, even on a refeed day, and being like, I think I might just call a helicopter to come pick me up. Like we're inside this little sort of sanctuary of walking at Burley, and I don't know if I'm going to make it out. Like I'm done. Like this hurts, man.
I was trying to talk to him and perk him up, and like it just wasn't working. So I was like, "That's cool, babe. We'll just walk in silence."
I had enough energy to talk to myself in my own brain, and that was about it.
Yeah. I think that your circle are all a little bit too intelligent to say this to you, Eric. But it's interesting when people that are stage ready have things said to them like, "Wow, you look fantastic. You must feel great." The better you look, the worse you feel is generally the rule.
Yeah, it was it's funny. Like it's when you go through the post prep period, if you've been shredded for a while, you have like every 2 weeks, you're like, oh, this is normal. And you're like, oh, no. Oh, this is normal. Like you come out of that kind of feeling like crap phase. But it was interesting. I felt really, really good. And I remember saying things like if I'd had 2 refeed days in a row, which I often did, or sometimes 3 at a certain stage, I'd mention to people or my wife, we'd be on our walk and I wasn't quite shredded yet, but I'd be like, you know what, if you drop my brain, from the off season into my body right now, I wouldn't know I was dieting.
Yeah.
But then let's talk about July. Even after a full 6 weeks of eating up and getting back to the highest calories even I had back when I made that little weird comparison, but now I'm really, really diced. And if I missed a meal on a refeed, I would all of a sudden be like, ooh, and just feel like, just like this feeling like death. And it made me realize like, I'm okay right now, but man, I'm just literally like, I'm on a tightrope of non-lethargy. And yeah, like libido, sleep, certain things just did not get fixed, even though I was eating the most I had during the whole prep. I did get to a point when I was diced, like you said, that body fat tipping point, and where I was eating 2,800 calories in the end of July, moving into my last show I did here in New Zealand was August 10th. And like every morning I would just wake up looking peaked and shredded, looking fantastic, but I just did not feel 100%.
Yeah.
And there was just didn't matter, it didn't matter what I did.
Quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was there a reason why you chose to go for the slower reverse?
So the interesting thing, well, basically is because I was still competing. So I did a show in April, and then I did a show in the first weekend in July, the third week in July, and then the second weekend in August. So I did the show in April, and I was literally only 2 kilos off, like I said. So I had a little bit of a diet break. I went to Italy with my wife and did a seminar there and didn't track and didn't gain a single kilo, just to give you an idea of how I was not jacked up from the diet at that point, which is pretty cool. And then I took... I started pushing in May, and then I really struck, quote unquote, I did a digging phase in June to get into peak condition. And that was, I want to say the first or second weekend in June, I got to like there's really nothing left for you to lose kind of thing, or close enough to it that it didn't matter. And we decided to start putting the calories the other way. And I was like on an average, including refeeds, of 1,600 calories a day in, I want to say that digging phase. And then every week we just started bumping it up. The first thing I did was we immediately jumped up to like 1,900, which Berto and I felt confident would not be a surplus at that point, even with all the metabolic adaptation. And then we went up to like, I think 2,100 after that the next week. and then 100, and then I did my next show. So I walked into that show on 2,300 calories a day. And we did that again for the next 2, and that's with a peak week as well. And then so I was at 2,500 calories for that July show, and then I just kept going. And we were trying to see what could I maintain on going into that August show, and it was around 2,800 calories at the very end. And my stage weight was the same. I looked great. I looked probably my best in July. I think my body just started to complain by the time August came around, like, I don't want you to be shredded anymore. And I started just to have like weird responses to foods, a little weird, more digestive issues, and unpredictable peak. But yeah, I didn't necessarily choose to do a reverse diet out of the season. It was more I'm eating up into shows. But the effect was that I got to experience what the reverse diet is supposed to be. Like, the marketing for reverse diet is eat all the food, keep your shreds. And the way they justify it is they'll show you the before and after. Someone lean, someone still lean, and higher macros, right? That's the pitch. Eat all the food you want, and it's quantified by macros and still be shredded. And the lie is that you'll feel good on those higher macros, but even though you're shredded.
The lie is also that you're not actually back in a surplus. So of course you should look that way.
Exactly.
And I think
you're coming out of a deficit, and now you're going to not a suppressed maintenance, but an upregulated slightly maintenance at best. Yeah.
And then even as that continuum rises, you're like a 50 calorie surplus. Like, guess how much fat you're going to gain on 50 calories. And then it's like a 75 calorie surplus. So like your exposure to the surplus is so elongated that the body fat gain is just also so elongated. And then all of a sudden, it's like
meat goes up accordingly.
Well, that's the other thing too. Your activity goes up subconsciously because you're eating more food. And then there's this moment I even say to people too, like, I put food back in pretty quickly post-comp. And I'm like, do not get excited by how you look in the first month, because it's a misrepresentation.
It will catch up.
The ability to restore fuel is far faster than fat as a fuel as opposed to carbohydrates.
Mm.
And if I continue to rise your calories, there's going to be a moment where you will wake up in the morning and go, oh,
what happened?
Where did all that come from? It's a really, really weird, again, it's like a body fat tipping point almost.
Yeah.
So I quite like the speedy, but yeah, I misheard you. I thought you meant you did a slow reverse post final comp, not into the actual comp. That's cool.
So yeah, it was cool because I was able to really just kind of show people, and I actually did this for mass. I talked about post-dieting strategies. I was like, look here, I did the best iteration of the reverse diet, and guess what? I slept 4 hours, woke up, and I had zero libido. Like, that did not change. And my strength was actually starting to come down at the end of comp when I maintained it pretty well previously. So don't believe the hype. Like, I look great, but that's about it. And I didn't even want to look great anymore. I was tired of it. Like, I'm annoyed at chairs that don't have cushions at this point. Like when I sit down, like, know.
Please tell me you didn't get a pair of those feeler shoes just to make sure that your heels did not hit the ground. The nice, real thick-soled.
I do know those. Fortunately, I'm an Air Max man, so I kind of already had those. They've got the slight heel. That's mainly so I can do.
Dean always complains about like hard seats because he's got no fat on his bum. So that's extra hilarious for us.
Yeah.
He said one day he was in the shower and he was just washing himself, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, that nearly went, because usually there's some fat stopping his hand from entering himself, but there was just no fat anymore.
There was definitely no entry.
Are you sure?
There was well, the speed of clench was very fast.
Good, I'm glad.
But it wasn't that. It was like, holy shit, I didn't realize how much fat you have between your bum cheeks.
Yeah, so this is something that we call cat butt. So when you see, it works for dogs too, depending on whatever animal you love, but when you see a quadruped, when they walk away from you, you can see into them, that's just right there. And when you have achieved a certain level of leanness, you can also, no matter how hard you clench, depending on the shape of your glutes, or just a slight inclination, you can also achieve cat butt. And that's when you've really made it.
I'd not heard of cat butt before. I like it.
Well, yeah. Liz and I.
It's something I coined. So, yeah.
Liz was lucky enough to roll tan me my first competition.
Oh man!
And we were pretty fresh, so like it was a good entry into our relationship.
Dean had a cock sock on for those watching on YouTube.
Oh yeah.
Dean was like this, and
but I wasn't even that bent over, and I was like, "You can't see everything, right?" She's like,
"Legs were split.
I can definitely see your ass." And I was like, "Oh." Well, like, I'm kind of like this, like, good boy.
Good to meet you. Yeah, I'm shredded. Yeah.
Look, there's just some things that a girlfriend at the time should not see, especially in the light of day.
It's too early.
Still somehow married you. But it haunts me at nighttime.
I wore a pretty cocksock.
Well, if you guys can weather that in your relationship, I'm very confident you guys will make it for the long haul.
Anyone that can weather a prep or two. I mean, your lovely wife has weathered, do you say 12? and 17 powerlifting, was it?
13 shows. Yeah.
Oh
so
my
she's
That relationship is lockdown, man.
Sweetheart, I'm not
She's
hanging
done
around
well.
for 13 shows.
Yeah.
No.
What were some of the biggest things? So would you say that the ease mentally, like the mental fatigue, was probably the easiest thing from this default approach as opposed to tracking from 20 odd weeks out?
Yes, I think so. Like what really made me realize is that the it all gets pulled from the same like willpower pool, if you will. Like, you know, and you like how much rebellion you have during your recovery phase, like how often you're like, damn it, I deserve some donuts, I think is inverse to how much trauma you sustain during the prep. It's going to happen no matter what. It should happen. Like, you need to gain body fat. But I got up to, at the heaviest I got post comp was 96, which, as you recall, like the peak of my bulk was 100. So it was fine. Like, I didn't look bad or anything like that. It took some adjustment because I was, you know, I was used to not lean being anything over 81, you know, kind of thing. But yeah, I like it. No one ever looked at me and went, "Whoa, Eric, like you've really had a rough transition from the stage." Like, they're
Not
like,
to your
"Oh,
face.
you've gained." No, not to my face. No, exactly. It leads to, so as far as I know, I'm good. But anyway, like, so that was interesting, and it made me realize that this is the leanest I've ever been, and it was, I would say, my easiest contest prep thus far. It wasn't easy, but which is an important distinction. The ability to get right to the precipice of where that body fat tipping point was, almost effortlessly, or comparatively effortlessly, gave me the ability to go, right, I'm going to be shredded and I'm going to eat nothing. And I'm going to do that for a couple months. And I have the willpower to do it. But I mean, in previous years, like 07, I didn't even get as lean as I got from my April show when I got on stage for my very first season. And it took everything out of me. And I put on 22 kilos in 2 months after that show was over.
Wow.
You know, I had a complete blowout. And that was when I had like, my wife sat me down with an ultimatum, like, hey, if you're going to keep doing bodybuilding this way, I'm not going to stick around. And that's kind of what was one of those turning point moments that eventually led to, you know, 3D Muscle Journey being what it is, and us trying to find healthy approaches. And 09 was way better, but 09 was basically just, I learned how far I could push myself from 07. I removed some of the dumbest things I did, and then I just leveraged my willpower, and I just ground myself into dust to get striated glutes, and, you know, might have had a hamstring tear in the process, but we got there, right? Yeah. And then 2011 is when I learned more, and I would have gotten leaner, but I just didn't need to. My goal was to win a show. I won a show, and I was like, I'm done, you know, like, so there was clearly some lingering fatigue from previous seasons there, even in 2011. So now I had like 8 years removed, and I got to the point where, about as lean as I was in 2011 when I won a show, which is like I said, pretty damn lean, but not crazy shredded. And I had not incurred significant fatigue. And I was like, wow, I've got a lot left here. So it allowed me, I think, this default habit-based approach of not tracking, this informed kind of eating, like awareness of where I needed to be and keeping myself an appropriate hunger level, appropriate energy level, et cetera, maintaining performance, and just kind of looking at all this biofeedback of, all right, where should I be for how lean I'm getting at this stage of prep? And, you know, just modifying my behaviors in that way. That got me so that when it came time to need to really knuckle down and really sustain some suffering to get shredded, to where I was ready for it. And I was okay with that. And then, you know, that was a really hard 3-week push that I did. And that was coming out of me being semi-fatigued, but not too bad in May. So there's like this end of May, early June period where the prep really sucked. You know, it was, but I timed it. Like, I didn't have work meetings. I didn't have any obligations. I had cordoned off my life, and I just killed myself. And then the food just came up the whole time. So, like, man, it was not that bad as far as prep. It did get very hard, and it never got easy as I'd wanted it to after the food coming up. But I think the habit-based approach allowed me to have the you know, petrol in the tank to push those final bits to get into great condition and really be at my best on stage.
Love it.
Yeah.
Who would you say would not be an appropriate group of people to engage in a default diet in the front end of a prep?
That's a great question. And I think probably most first or even second time competitors. I think if we're going to use biofeedback to inform our behaviors, you have to be able to know what you should be experiencing. right? So if you haven't been shredded before, you don't know what that feels like. You don't know like how easy should be the first month of prep. Like I think experienced competitors know that if you're doing it right, the first month of prep is just like you say no to pizza. You know, like even if you're tracking macros, you can fit so much in that it doesn't look that much different. And it's not hard. It's mostly just you wishing you were a little leaner and that the process would go faster, right?
Yeah, it's just an annoying phase of like some restraint. You're like, God damn it, man. But for no visual gain. You're
it
like,
doesn't look like it's paying off yet.
It's skinny fat
Exactly.
phase. It's the worst phase of them all.
Exactly. Going for a dude, going from like 16 to 13% body fat, you just look smaller. You know, it's not great. So, So like, I think if you haven't been all the way to the stage and gotten pretty damn lean before, to know what that can feel like, shouldn't feel like, when it was like at its worst, when it was like at its best, you probably don't have the experience to be able to have confidence in that approach, or to know when, like if you're early in that first month, like we're talking about, it's just annoying and you're dying, like eat more. Like, but if you don't know that, then how can you do that?
Yeah.
And I think another thing is some of the personality traits, like if you're very high in neuroticism, I think I do believe that's modifiable to some degree, but some people are just more stressed by not tracking. And I think for them, I wouldn't give them a fully like intuitive approach. I would say, all right, let's create some constraints that allow you to leverage some biofeedback. Like we'll give you a carbohydrate and a fat range, you know, and here are the if-then statements that you can use to establish when. So they still have rules to kind of fall back on. It's a little less qualitative. And I think that's probably that might be the best they can do if they're really high in neuroticism. But if someone can dial that down, then this might be a viable approach. The way I like to ask people, like let's find out how neurotic everyone is I normally ask everyone, okay, who tracks macros in a room? Like I've done this at a few conferences and it really pisses people off. So I enjoy it. Everyone raised their hand, right? Like, okay, so who does this? You hit certain targets, and then at the end of or you kind of you freestyle a little bit for the most of the day, and then for your last meal, you see what you have left, and you just hit that. And everyone goes, yeah, I do that. That's the first hack. And I'm like, great, you guys are doing it. You're doing great. You're killing it. Now, who after you eat that meal, then goes back and tracks that meal? And then most people keep their hands up, and I'm like, and I go, why? And everyone's like, well, it's just so that I have the data to look back on. I'm like, no, it's because you needed to write it down. Like, you know what your calories were for that phase. It's like, give me a break. You're neurotic, you know. And then I argue with them for 20 minutes about their eating disorders. So that's kind of the that's like one little gauge. Like if you really enjoy tracking things, if you feel satisfied, if you feel incomplete, if you don't write those things down, if unknowns give you this kind of an impending sense of stress, like you can mitigate that as much as you want. But I think to some degree, some people, that's just something you know about yourself, and that you manage it. So I don't think everyone can take probably as intuitive approach as maybe I did. I tend to be someone who is a little more big picture thinking. Not that I'm not neurotic and crazy. I mean, I wouldn't have done 13 shows, but I think on the spectrum, at least in the bodybuilding community, I'm a little more freewheeling than most. So I think that's something to consider, is your personality type and then your experience. Because if you can look at food and you roughly know the macros and you track for a while and you know the calories and you're well informed, you don't have any orthorexic beliefs about food, and you've also been shredded and you're reasonably relaxed compared to the most neurotic bodybuilding competitors, it's worth giving it a shot.
I'm super glad that distinction got made, because as I was listening, I'm like, we're talking about a history of yourself of competing from 2004, I think you said was the start, or 2005.
2007. Sorry, I first got into bodybuilding in 2005 to my first season in 07. Yeah.
And then so we're talking like in 07 to 2019 was when you did this approach. So we're talking 12 years of education, time spent in the game. And I said to Liz the other day, I think I could probably default diet, to use your term, till probably around about 6 to 8 weeks out. I reckon I could, just because of behaviors. But then the flip was like, I hope the clients aren't listening and people are listening saying, I can do what Eric did. Because my experience has been exactly that, like one, first or second year or even third year competitors, is most of them have followed rigidity, complete rigidity in either diet type and foods or maybe inflexible. And they have no idea how to actually handle it outside of that. I don't know if I coined my term or if I semi-stole it and blended a couple together.
What's that?
My approach with prep currently with most of my clients is what I tell them is rigid flexible. So I send them macros, they write a diet that they think they'll enjoy. They have complete input into that based around parameters of, say, like fruits and vegetables and all the rest of it. but they have the flexibility to change should they wish to. You know, like you have options. Like,
What's rigid about that?
so the rigid is that like the diet is written, they kind of follow the diet.
Right.
But if they want to change, they can. And what I find is that people that have like a really good internal compass around how they feel, they're kind of just like, man, I'm happy just eating this basic food that's pretty good. It serves me well. I'm not trying to like fit pancakes. I'm not trying to do the following. But then one day of the week, they're like, hey, man, I had steak tonight because I just felt like steak. And I'm like, cool, dude. And then the end of it is like, I have a lot of feedback at the end when I talk to people about, hey, when we go into this next phase post-comp, this recovery phase, the people that are like, I can't wait to smash donuts, or I can't wait to go for the very typical hyper-processed, they require no time for preparation. Those people are in trouble, and they haven't really established that appropriate thought between, you know, sort of brain and gut. Whereas the other ones are just like, I just want to eat more food and go out with my friends. I'm like, this is.
I just don't want to feel bad.
Like, you're going to do well. Yeah.
Yes. I just don't want to hurt when I sit down. Yeah. I don't want to be lethargic. Yeah. They're two very different things. Yeah. I think you like the way I started coining that was structured flexibility, because I think, you know, like rigid and flexible, like I think they feel like they're opposing concepts, but structure just means that you know the constraints, but you can have constraints that change based on if-then statements. So I like to kind of coin that as like structured flexibility. And this goes back to something that you brought up earlier, and I experienced the same thing, Dean, was that you were afraid to talk about doing this at first because you didn't know how your clients would take it. And I think I was the same because I didn't actually know how to coach it. Like, I knew how to do it on my own, but when I created a spreadsheet and when I gave someone guidelines, I was like, you know, like, what do I type into this column? Like, I don't actually know how to, I hadn't yet created a framework for what that coaching looked like. And then that's when I started to do the things like, all right, we're going to go from macros to protein and calories, to just body weight and protein, or whatever thing we track for you that you need to manage to get right. Maybe just body weight, and just using satiety, to then less frequent body weight. And then, you know, so basically like, what's the minimum amount of biofeedback? And then, can we just do, you know, values for hunger and satiety? So I actually had to build a new coaching skill set to be able to teach these skills, because the only way I knew how to coach people was to give them macros and adjust them, you know. And I could speak philosophically about the healthier form of restraint and what true flexible restraint was, and when they could, you know, change their macros, or which foods they could eat, or maybe I have some structure, but I wasn't able to impart the same things I was doing with myself in a coaching relationship for a while. And I think that took, it's a different skill set, you know, which I think is probably why there was some lag time before I was comfortable speaking about this. And, you know, that it's funny. There was one thing I told Berto in April was that I'm not going to tell anybody this, because I peaked for my April show not tracking. Like, I did a peak week purely eating out. Like, we went and I just chose stuff like sushi and stuff like that and eyeballed it, and had a pretty good peak for April. And I was like, this one, I'm not going to tell anybody. Like, I don't think people should be doing this, you know, like, but eventually I have talked about it clearly, as I'm doing now. But it's interesting, because it just goes to show you how much we value precision and quantifying things and being analytical in bodybuilding. And I think for good reason, don't get me wrong. But one thing I started to realize is that there aren't people who are going to hear me say this and just be like, you know what, I'm just going to wing a peak week. Like, that's not the mentality of people who are in that position. You know, I think a lot of people, they just hear it and they either go, man, I don't know how you do that, I'm not ready, or I'm so abhorrent to that idea that I think it's suboptimal, you know? And so I've been more confident vocalizing it, discussing it, and trying to give the full spectrum, pros and cons, and who it is and isn't appropriate for. I think it is very much an advanced technique, you know, taking this approach. And maybe someone who came from it's theoretically possible that someone could start from a fully intuitive approach and only learn that, and not have an awareness of, you know, like macros and all that stuff. But and I guess there's examples of that. Like, I think Sean Ray kind of took that approach. You ever listen to him talk? But it's certainly something that's difficult for me to conceive of what that would really look like. And I do think it would be better to have some of that quantitative knowledge to then jump from into taking it.
My old boss was a big fan of Sean Ray, and he followed his protocols for food, and he followed Dorian's for training. And interestingly, yes, he doesn't really know like what carbs are in a rice, but he knows rice was a carb, and he knew that, you know, chicken was a protein. And his whole prep diet was essentially just like, I ate chicken, I ate rice, and I had pineapple.
He was a very successful bodybuilder too.
Yeah. And then it was like, I did a bit of cardio. I didn't get leaner. I'll just half my rice. Like that's a calorie.
I'll just do more
and
cardio.
He just didn't take out the proteins, and he just eventually took down the carbs. So like, even though they don't know, like they know that those are the three sources of at least those types of macros, and they start to just regulate it out and make sense.
Yeah.
I think with that, like you can get lucky, or like from what I can currently see in the typical like guru-esque IFBB coaching freaking genre that is there now, is that they basically just crash diet them and then say eat sushi, because like you can't really make a 250-pound dude get fat if he eats a lot of sushi when he's been eating 2,000 calories for 6 weeks. Like it's such an easy way to make them do it. People think it's magical because sushi makes people massive, but of course it does. You were starved for 6 weeks. Like,
you use a lot of soy sauce too.
Yeah.
There might be some misaligned incentives here, though, for coaches to poo-poo this idea, because, man, do I want to drop names? I don't know. No. Because people like to have really complicated concepts, like you, possibly, you mere mortal, could not understand. Pay me $300 a week and I'll teach you these really complex things where we consider like how much sunlight has hit each broccoli stem. And, you know, only then can you get the best results. But what we're talking about here is something entirely different. Like you learn and you kind of gauge how you're feeling, and like you can't, it's not sexy, you can't sell that for $300 a week to a client. Like, so I think that there would be some incentives out there from coaches to try and hold people back from getting to this stage.
100%.
Well, let's not call them coaches then.
Yeah.
Because I think it took me an incredible amount of time, thought, meeting with the rest of 3DMJ, evaluating things, playing with ideas to figure out how do I actually facilitate and mentor someone to be able to do some aspects of what I'm doing, and what does it look like for someone who doesn't have as much experience? What does it look like for someone who's a little more neurotic, et cetera? When is this important? When isn't it? And the actual process is so individualized that I couldn't create an ebook about this. Like this is that it'd be like, you know, it's something that I can speak to, you know, a dietitian who've been in clinical practice and they go, oh, I do some similar things. And I can get some ideas from them because they have training, but it's actual coaching. You know, we're teaching someone skills and helping facilitate them have a different relationship with food in the context of physique sport. So you're 100% right that it's not something that is packageable and sellable in a you know, an X and O's kind of way that you could just write down, here's the protocol and sell it. But at the same time, I think it's also quite complex, highly individual, and takes a lot of skill and forethought to actually impart. And that's the interesting thing, like, you know, with, you know, auto-regulation or true coaching or like bottom-up programming, like using RPE and like kind of some of the intuitive quote unquote approaches to training, they require more thought on the side of the athlete. And it's something that they're typically not familiar with. And it requires more coaching to get there, and a much more of a facilitative approach. Kind of like, you know, when you sit down with a therapist and they ask you a whole bunch of questions to try to get you to think differently. It's not like you can just go into a room and stare at a wall and have that happen. Even though you end up coming up with the answers to your own problems, the skill of the clinician to help you assess new perspectives and try new things and deliver those messages in ways that make sense to you is, man, it's not something that comes easily. And that's why it took a couple years before some of the things that I was doing entered into my coaching practice. So I agree with you, but it's not to say that it's because the stuff is too on the client or too simple, if that makes sense.
No, totally. Yeah, I guess my point is just that like some coaches don't feel like it's within their ability to coach these things, and so that they put it down and they say, you shouldn't be doing that. What you should be doing is my $300 a week program.
Well, I think
right. So then they're not relying on themselves. They need to keep them coming to the guru. Yeah, well said. No, I totally got you.
Yeah, they keep the tools as if that they are the only ones that can hold them or yield them, like they're Thor, you know?
Yeah.
Yes.
We assess our client life cycle because Dean does comp prep only. I don't do a physique comp prep. But we assess our life cycle with our clients, and we don't want clients to stick around forever. If a client is hanging on for too long, like that's a failure on our behalf, because what we're trying to do is create permanent positive change. And that doesn't happen when we create reliability. So we have a look at why is this client sticking around for so long? What haven't they learned yet? What are they still relying on us for? And what can we do to change that?
Yeah.
And coaches just need to learn that there's how many million people in Australia or the world if you work online. And if you don't have enough clients that you can, make successful send off and start new ones, and you're not very good at your job, maybe you should become a hairdresser.
There's only 26 million people in Australia, and it's a limited resource. We don't want to tap it out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think this whole, like you said, bottoms up approach and giving your clients the opportunity to understand.
I like that you said bottoms up. You put a plural on that instead of bottom up.
I did actually. We'll take it. A bottoms up approach. That would be the code if you wanted to get some sun in the middle, because that's a new thing apparently.
That's right.
Sun on the rectum.
The perineum tanning. Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Taint tanning. Yeah.
What the fuck is that? Oh my god.
So bottoms up. But it's this whole, like you provide people the opportunity to understand the principles so they can apply their own protocols, as opposed to saying, this is the protocol, if you don't follow that, you suck.
Yes.
Yeah. And the answer, people listening, if you ask your coach a question, if the answer is because I said so, or trust the plan, not a great answer. Get a new coach maybe.
Yeah, if you're discouraged from asking questions, if you are penalized subtly or explicitly when you ask a question, that's typically not ideal.
No, not at all.
Now, if I knew you weren't American and I went for the bottoms up and then you just decided to pronounce that penalized, I would assume that you're just trying to make another sex joke. But I imagine it's just because you're
penalized. There you go.
Much better. No, Eric, we really appreciate your time, but know that you're a really, really busy fella. So I might ask you, our little tagline for the podcast is how to be less shit. So I might ask you to try and summarize this episode with some less shit tips.
Absolutely. So I think we talked about a fair bit, but if we were to focus in on the nutrition side of it and the actual practical application, my advice would be for anyone who is currently been tracking and has been using tracking in a way that they're rigidly holding on to it because they don't know how to do it otherwise, some really useful tips just to try to step away is just to have one day where you don't track. Don't change your habits. Just don't put things on the scale. Literally, it's the same exact day. Just don't open MyFitnessPal. Don't put things on the scale and just eat and eyeball it. And I think that little just gateway behavior, when you see that your weight doesn't change and nothing changes really, kind of allows you just to get a little more freedom. And you can make it a weekend. You can make it a Taco Tuesdays. Where you eventually want to get to is that if you have Taco Tuesday, and even if you overeat, even if you decide to have the chips and the bread, that the next day you find, I'm just not quite as hungry and you eat a little bit less. And that doesn't happen overnight, but I can tell you, and I think all three of us can tell you from experience, that it is quite a freeing place to get to, and it will actually unlock improved performance in the future to where you can make more decisions based on the changing reality of your body and your environment over time. And it should start with baby steps, because I think to someone, speaking to myself, to where I was in, say, 2007, this would have all just bounced off the armor of my denial at that time. And I think had someone said, you know what, just give one day a shot, or I want you to track macros, but also track a 1 to 5 rating of satiety and hunger, that would have been something I could have started and would have actually gone a much longer way than I might have expected. So those are kind of the baby steps I'd recommend for anyone who wants to try this. Try it in the off season when there is, much less at stake, if you will. And, don't feel like you have to do this, but if you are someone who feels trapped by tracking, those are probably the initial steps I would take. That would be some pretty easy advice to be less shit.
Yeah, that's.
Can I sprinkle in purchasing our ebook, Life After Dieting?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Which honestly talks exactly about this. It's all about what to do after the diet's over, when you're at a weight maintenance phase, how to do that without MyFitnessPal.
Yeah, if we can even take the dieting success rate from 5% to 6% after 5 years, fuck, that'd be nice. Wouldn't it be nice to get it higher even again, obviously, but it's such a shit stat, and I think this is super important. discussion for everybody to listen to, either in a prep phase or a non-prep phase. Anyone that's dieted, because it is this management long-term that people really do seem to struggle with the most.
And just live in this perpetual state of trying to lose weight.
Yeah, that's a pretty awful place to be.
Yeah, totally. Now, to wrap it up, we've got some good questions for you.
But first of all, we always ask our guests if they have anything
yes.
that they think is worth sharing to the people that are listening at home. So it could be like educational, a book, a podcast. I know of one.
A movie.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to plug a future thing that's coming out in I think only a week, where myself and our 3DMJ registered dietitian, Steve Taylor, are releasing a course called Transitioning Away from Tracking, which is super appropriate based on what we're talking about. So just keep an eye on the 3DMJ Vault. If you want to get notified by it, you can go to 3dmusclejourney.com. You can click on the Vault, and then you can enter your email to get made sure you put on our email newsletter for that. And when it launches, it'll come out and we'll tell you about it. And that's basically me and Steve talking through the science and then the practice. And it also comes with a chapter from the Muscle and Strength Pyramids Nutrition book on behavior and lifestyle to try to really help people do exactly what we're talking about. So that's the main thing I'd want to plug.
That is cool.
That
is really cool.
All right, now the fun stuff. We have 2 fast round questions, and then we have an interesting last question.
Okay, so it's your last 24 hours on Earth. How do you spend it?
I would definitely lift. That's one thing I would absolutely do, and I'd max out too, because you got to see where you're at. I want to have my Armageddon PR stats, so I'd probably do a super total, maybe even some strongman stuff, and then I would absolutely try to get my entire friend group and family group together, as many of them as I could. And since there's no reason to have a savings anymore, I'd offer to buy people tickets, get them out here. We'd go somewhere nice, maybe all meet up in Hawaii, maybe someone a little more remote, because if everyone knows it's the last day, that could be a pretty busy Hawaii.
Would you tell everyone? I don't know if that would be sad.
Oh, yeah.
It'd just be full of crying, wouldn't it?
Man, well, only if I needed to get them to actually show up. If they were like, Eric, why on this random Thursday are you expecting me to leave work and go to Oahu? I'd be like, so here's the thing. I got good news and bad news. The good news is you get to take a day off work and there'll be no repercussions. The bad news is there'll be no anything tomorrow. So yeah, the goal would be to exhaust my savings to try to have as many of the people in my life I care about have a fantastic day with me, and after lifting. And I think those would be probably the two things I'd tick off.
You are 2 for 2 podcast guest yesterday, Matt Stenzel. He's a powerlifter here in Australia. He went for a super total.
He did.
And you're the first 2 people who've asked that question. So
yeah.
It's interesting.
Maybe we'll have a clean run. We change our questions every 10 episodes, so we'll see if the next 8 have the same answer.
Ooh.
I'm going to say they might, because everyone loves lifting that we speak to.
We do have a particular group of people.
There is a default type person who comes on the podcast. Yeah.
That's funny. All right, next question. Are there any weird habits, hobbies, or rituals that you engage in?
Not that I'm going to share with you. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. Any weird habits, hobbies, or rituals? Yeah. So one thing I do is I read a lot, but I partition what I read to different ways that my brain wants to be at different times. So I read continuing education, science, crap like that during my workday. But when I go to bed every night, I read sci-fi or fantasy, and it's to completely disconnect from the world that I live in all the time, and it requires no commitment. I get to not think about some random Instagram comment that pissed me off or any of that. And I've read probably 1 to 2 sci-fi or fantasy books a month since I was like 13. So
that's exactly what yesterday's podcast guest said as well, that he does that for the same reason.
Is this the same guy who wanted to do a super total?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you need to connect us, because maybe this is my new best friend. This is pretty awesome.
So.
Yeah.
Matt is an awesome dude. I'm sure he would be stoked.
Yeah, he's a legend.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So are the comments like, "You're not even jacked. Why should I listen to you, Eric"? Are they the comments that piss you off?
I've never gotten that comment before. People are always like, "Man, you look like Captain America. You're amazing. You're jacked." So
is that so? Okay.
No, I've definitely got that comment before. I used to get, when I was coaching Matt Ogus and we'd be on YouTube together, people like, "Why are you bigger than your coach?" And I'm like, does Bill Belichick have to be the best football player in the world? Come on.
That's so funny.
You know what? I might poke you one day, is just to make you not go to sleep. Is like, man, you look like Captain America before he went into the machine.
Yeah, you look like Steve Rogers specifically. Yeah.
No, I wasn't assuming that people said that to you, because I don't think you're jacked. I know I've heard you say it before on Iron Culture. So
Absolutely, yeah, that's definitely happened. Happens less though. Now that the beauty of Instagram is now that if you take pictures during a contest prep, you forever look like that because I can just post pictures randomly of me shredded. It's good.
Yep. Whenever I want to educate people, I always attach it with a picture just so they know really how big my brain is. Because it's got nothing to do with what comes out of my mouth. It's just solely like, what I look like in a small pair of undies.
100%.
Last question is if you're familiar with the game, it's called a Would You Rather game. It's from a game called Shitty Choices. There's only one rule, or two rules. One, she can dump the card if she doesn't like the question on there. And two, if it's been asked before, she'll dump it.
Yeah, but I only get one extra picking.
And that's not going to work.
Oh, that's an A card. Don't worry. All right. Would you rather have a sexual dream about your ex, that's not that bad, or your cousin? I don't know if that's a good card. Am I going to dump that one?
Depends how particular.
Everyone has a hot ex, and who doesn't want to have that dream? So, I mean, love you, Dean.
What if your ex is your cousin? No, I'm from California. I'm not from that part of the States. Go ahead.
Would you rather get a hickey that you can't hide, or give one? That's shit.
That's the game.
All right.
Eric got lucky.
All right.
He got lucky. There's some terrible cards in this game.
All right. What would you rather?
So I didn't. What was the second? What was the second question?
Give a hickey that the other person can't hide, and I'm just going to add in. Everyone knows it's from you.
No, it's get a hickey that you can't hide, or give one.
Yeah, give one that the other person can't hide.
Yeah.
And everyone seeing the hickey knows that you gave it to them. It can't be your wife. Just to sprinkle in some fun.
It can't be my wife. So A, I have to cheat on my wife.
I don't know. Is giving hickeys cheating? Maybe.
I mean, Dean, this is your partner. Just ask that question.
It's a mouth. I would just say I didn't give them a hickey, Liz. I gave them a mouth Chinese burn.
Yes.
Which
I attacked them with my mouth. Man, that's the whole "it can't be your wife" is a whole new curveball because now I'm trying to figure out, am I trying to hide the fact that I'm cheating? Well, I don't want to cheat. And if I did cheat, I'd want to come out with it. So this has actually created quite the conundrum. I think I would rather have the hickey that I can't hide because then the house of cards would finally topple. And I know that if I was hiding the fact that I was cheating, that I would already be dying inside. So I would need that to come out.
Look, I really feel like you're sprinkling in some extra drama here because no one's talking about cheating except Eric. So is this?
But if it's not my wife.
But it's just a hickey. Like,
so we're going to go with the fact that the hickey is not cheating.
You don't have to be like having intercourse with them while you're giving them a hickey. Like it's just a hickey.
But what if you want to?
All right. So I have not slept with anyone else, but I've been in some scenario where a hickey is either being given or received, and it's not my wife. I would rather it be seen. I'd rather have it be seen on me. So I have to explain myself, and I can not feel. I can sleep at night and eventually just get in whatever fight with my wife needs to happen. So. Yeah.
I think I'd prefer to have the hickey too.
Would you?
I wouldn't give it. Who knows what's on that neck or wherever you're giving it.
Yeah,
I probably overthought that a little bit, but I like how you're just like, I don't want to put my mouth on something where I don't know if it's clean or not.
Part of this game, you have to ask all the questions prior. Like you have to come up with the situation. Am I cheating? Is it my wife? Is it my sister? Like, is it my dog? Whatever it may be.
I could just see myself giving or getting a hickey from someone else, not in a sexual environment, but just like because it's funny or something like that.
But a hickey takes time. So like you definitely need to know that person, You can't just be there just like leeching onto them.
I had whiplashes on my butt one day because I learnt to do double unders and I kept whipping myself on the butt and then I had these whiplashes and then Dean saw them and never even asked me why I had whiplashes on my butt. I was like, dude, you can ask about this. Like, this looks really suspicious. I get that.
It's called trust.
It's
trust. There must be an explanation for this besides you have a partner with a cat of nine tails who I don't know about. Yeah.
And then the 50 Shades of Grey book is on her side table.
Look, this hickey is from this new CrossFit thing that I'm trying to learn.
Safety bar squad. I've already figured it out.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Eric. Well, it was fabulous chatting to you. And I hope that listeners, you got a lot from this episode and you go and check out the transitioning away from tracking.
Yep.
The 3DMJ.
But if people want to find you, mate, where are the best websites and handles and all that jazz?
Yeah, first, just thanks for having me on. This is a great discussion. I hope it's really helpful to your audience. And you can find me at 3dmusclejourney.com. That's the number 3, the letter D, Muscle Journey. And then from there, you can find links to the Muscle and Strength Pyramids books, monthly applications in strength sport, my research review with Greg Knuckles, Mike Serdos, and Eric Trexler, That's where our podcast is, the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. That's where our blog posts are. The only other content you'll find that isn't linkable through 3D Muscle Journey is Iron Culture podcast, which is me and Omar being ridiculous, but discussing the science, culture, and history of lifting. And you can find that on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. And then finally, if you want more kind of daily content, although I haven't posted today yet, but I will, at Helms 3DMJ on Instagram.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's a lot.
People know where to find us, so
Love
we'll
it.
leave that there.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed the episode. If it was your second time listening through, we hope you got something from the second listen.
Something new, maybe.
Something new.
Or just like further instated your beliefs.
Well, no, I do think that there was so much scattered in this episode that we couldn't possibly remember it all from just one listen years ago. So,
Unless you are like Eric the Almighty, you may.
exactly. And your brain's like a sponge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you liked it, what?
Please take a screenshot, share it on social media, tag Flex or Dean and I.
Yeah, tag Eric too. He'll be super confused as to why he'd be getting tags on this podcast so late.
From
Released, he'll
years-
be like, I'm pretty sure I did that a year ago.
More like 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's getting up there. So.
Maybe 3. I don't know. A while.
Yeah, if you liked it, do
Yeah.
that stuff.
YouTube channel, subscribe-y stuff, and I don't know what else. Apple, when you can give us stars and stuff.
IG, tag us in. Yeah, rate us 5 stars. We're not interested in the 4, as we tell you every week. If you're going to give us a 4, fuck off.
Oh, Dean, that's a bit rude. All right, guys. Laters.
See ya.